All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're starting Unit 4. You are learning at your own pace. Don't forget, something new for this unit is that we are going to post the CCFA questions sort of right on the notes so that when you're done, you can pause. You can answer truthfully, honestly on your own to see if you did actually hashtag get learned. And then if not, you know that you need to go get learned again and go back in the PowerPoint and catch up. So really quick, just things you're looking for, key ideas. You are looking for Boston and New York's early fighting in the war, how those two cities and territories took, kind of how they did against the British. You are also looking at the Battle of Trenton and the idea of Christmas. Hooray, Christmas. You're looking for a turning point and whether or not Saratoga is. You're looking for what happens during the winter at Valley Forge. And lastly, you're looking at something called the Treaty of Alliance. So, without further ado, all right, early into the war. These are the early years, early battles of the war. You have a group called the Green Mountain Boys, who are led by a man named Ethan Allen, as well as a group from Connecticut led by Benedict Arnold. And they go in and attack a fort in New York called Fort Ticonderoga, which was also part of the French and Indian War in New York in May of 1775. There's the painting right there of the Green Mountain Boys waking up the general inside the fort and capturing it. Now the big thing there's their patch on their arms. They were sharpshooters from the area of now Vermont. Now the Green Mountain Boys win at this fort and capture 59 cannons during the battle. And they march those cannons 200 miles to Boston, which would be a tough work to do. You have lots of men dragging these cannons, which weigh a couple hundred pounds apiece, to get to Boston to defend the city of Boston. So, moving on, over in Boston in June of 1775, we have the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, this battle is known as Bunker Hill, but it's really fought on an area called Breed's Hill. And here's the painting of Breed's Hill and the battle taking place there. If you notice, the red coats are on the bottom of the hill, and the American soldiers, or militiamen, and now Continental Army, that's what they're called, have the top of the hill, or they have high ground. Now that's important, having high ground. You can shoot down the hill, you can move down the hill. The only problem with that, just like playing Capture the Flag or just like playing King of the Mountain with your friends at home, is that if you're at the top of the hill, you can be surrounded and you can eventually just wear out. You have nowhere to go. You're at the top and there's nowhere else to go. So you have 1,200 Americans at the top of the hill fighting off 2,000 redcoats below. Now the Colonials resist 3 different charges up the hill. So the British over here are moving up the hill, and the Americans kind of shoot them back down the hill, resisting that charge. And one of the famous quotes from this battle is a Colonial Army officer yells out to his men not to shoot, or don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. Meaning that, wait till they get close enough to shoot at them because we have limited supplies. And again, you wanted to wait until they were close enough because their guns back then weren't totally accurate. Now when the smoke clears at the end of the battle, the British take the hill because the Americans have to retreat. So even though the Americans lose the battle because the British take the land, the Americans on paper, and when it goes out into the newspapers, there's 450 Americans that were killed and over 1,000 British killed. So on paper, it looks like the American army can actually hold their own and actually defeat when needed. In this case, the British then evacuate Boston. The British, instead of staying there because there's too much going on there, the British leave Boston because all the help is starting to show up from other colonies. So they leave Boston in January of 1776, and the leading commander, or the commanding officer for the British, a man named General Howe, takes over, and he orders his men to move to New York and capture New York City, thinking that it's in between the big cities of Boston and Philadelphia. So knowing that it's in between those two, New York City is kind of like the middle area, and that's what they want to take over. So again, the significance of this time period, or at least Bunker Hill, is that the militia stood up to the Redcoat Army, and it's a moral victory, and the more you hear about this, the more people that want to sign up. Moving on to New York. The city of New York, the main area of New York City, is easily captured by the British. I'm going to give everybody a second to think why. If you said because the Americans have no navy and the British have a huge navy and that New York is an island, hooray for you. Now New York City falls to the British pretty simply because the British have that navy and they pull up and just, with their cannons, wipe out New York City until General Washington and his men leave. And the British end up holding New York City until the end of the war, which does split the major colonies or major cities in half of Philadelphia and Boston. Now at this point, a year into the war, the Americans are losing badly. And General Washington, who again is a popular guy with the men, is still losing, and he's looking for a way to get the men's spirits up. And he knows that because they're signing up for this Continental Army, that they serve for 1 calendar year. So on New Year's Day of 1777, they can leave the army. The men have served their 1 year, or up till the 1 year, and they can leave. So Washington knows he needs to do something to boost spirits. So on Christmas Day, actually before Christmas, Washington and his men are camped outside Trenton, New Jersey. And the British are there as well. Now, the British have sent Hessian soldiers, which are German special forces. They are probably the best soldiers in the world at the time. These would be like black ops soldiers today. And the Hessians are across in Trenton, New Jersey. And Washington and his men are across the Delaware River and near Philadelphia, waiting to see what the Hessians will do, and knowing that if the Hessians were to cross this river, they would be wiped out. The American army would be wiped out. It's really all that they have left. So Washington knows that he needs to uplift his men's spirits, number one, to start winning, and number two, if he doesn't keep winning, his men will all leave when their contracts expire in the new year. So right before the new year, on Christmas Day, Washington's idea is that he's going to cross the Delaware River with 2,400 soldiers on Christmas night, and then surprise the Hessian soldiers on the day of December 26th. Now, they have word that the Hessians are partying because, again, it's Christmas. Everybody loves Christmas. So on Christmas, because the Hessians are in America and far away from their families, they are celebrating Christmas by drinking a lot and partying. So Washington assumes, because it's gentlemen's war tactics, that the Hessians won't be ready for them the next day, that they'll probably be partying late into the night and not be ready for any kind of attack. No one would attack on Christmas. That's just not gentlemanly. So what happens is Washington and his men cross this river, and it takes hours to do so. And his men, again, don't really want to do this. They think that if the Hessians are awake and not, are ready for them, they're going to be wiped out. But their general tells them this is what they're going to do. When they get to the land on the morning of December 26th, Washington and his men invade the city of Trenton and pretty much take over all the Hessians. The men that don't, or the Hessians that do not surrender, are gunned down. And like it says, over 1,000 Hessians are captured, a lot of them are killed, and not one American soldier is injured. So hooray for America. Moving on after that, the Americans turned to Princeton, New Jersey a couple days later on January 3rd, 1777, and the new British general in charge, whose name is General Cornwallis, who's there to defeat George Washington. That's his job, defeat Washington. And Washington again surprises the British in Princeton, and they retreat. So all of a sudden, America, who hadn't won anything, have won 2 battles in a row. Not major battles, but 2 battles in a row. All right, moving on to the actual turning point of the Civil War. Or not Civil War, excuse me, the Revolutionary War. Now, Trenton can be looked at as a turning point in a way for the soldiers. The actual turning point in the war, though, is the Battle of Saratoga. And this happens in October of 1777. The British generals, 3 of them, Howe, Burgoyne, and St. Leger, all agree to meet in Albany. They're going to surround Washington's army from 3 different locations, 3 different directions, and take the capital city of New York, Albany. Now, all 3 guys do communicate with each other, at least have this attack plan in mind, but all 3 men don't really follow it along. You have General Burgoyne, who marches from the south, from Montreal. He moves south to New York. He's defeated by an American army, and he has too many supplies, which are taking him too long to get there. So the American army, actually a small pocket of army soldiers, defeat Burgoyne and capture all those supplies. You have General St. Leger, who's going to Albany from the east, or moving east to Albany, and Benedict Arnold ends up tricking him in something. You could look that up. But St. Leger, again, is defeated by the militia, so they never get to Albany. And lastly, General Howe, who's upset that somebody else took over for him, deciding that he's going to march north. He's in the south. He's going to march north to Albany. Decides he's going to go to Philadelphia instead and capture the Founding Fathers, our government at the time, in our capital of Philadelphia. And he's going to be the hero of the war. So he's going to show Cornwallis that he's really important, and he trusts the other 2 men to do and defeat Washington. So when this battle is all said and done, or these 3 different kind of battles all wrapped into one, it is a turning point. All of a sudden, America is starting to look like they may win the war. So all of a sudden now, our friends across the pond The French, who have been sitting back watching this war happen, we've sent Ben Franklin over to France to try to ask for help, and for a while it hasn't really come yet. So now the French are starting to think, let's help the Americans, because, again, it's like an even war now. All of a sudden it looks like the Americans could win. The winter is spent at Valley Forge in December of 1777. Washington moves his men right outside Philadelphia to stay at Valley Forge, waiting to see what General Howe and his men will do before attacking Philadelphia. 12,000 American soldiers go to Valley Forge to spend the winter. Their camps are very bad. Some of the local members said that you could see tracks of blood in the snow. You could actually find the American army based on how bad it was, because the men's feet were cracking open due to the cold conditions and the fact that their boots and shoes were wearing out. So there are 3,000 men or soldiers that die during this winter without fighting at all. It's just poor conditions, lack of food, clothing, shelter, and diseases spreading when you have that many men not taking care of themselves in a small area. So Valley Forge is a suffering time for the Americans. But again, this is a time where the war is drawing even, so Washington's trying to keep his men motivated. Now, a man that comes in is this gentleman down here in the painting, Baron von Steuben. He's from Prussia, which is a real country back then, to help train the Americans. He's like a drill sergeant, an angry guy who does find some fun sometimes, but overall he's angry a lot. And he teaches the men how to drill, how to work in lines, how to form straight lines, shoot their guns, kind of like teaching them how to play or fight in a gentleman's war. Another man that comes over, and if you notice he has gray hair there, but he's actually 19, is a French kind of wealthy noble. His name's Marquis de Lafayette. He comes over to serve as an officer helping Washington also fight in Pennsylvania. He's never paid for his help by the Americans, but he does go back to France a couple times to help persuade the French king for help. All of a sudden, another guy that helps out is the governor of Louisiana, which is a territory back then. His name is Bernardo de Galvez, and he has a makeshift army of Spanish, French, and Native Americans who help with the Americans as well, help get this country to be independent. All of a sudden, our will to get Ben Franklin help, or get Ben Franklin to get the French to help, pays off. In February of 1778, now that it looks like America could win, the Treaty of Alliance is signed. And Ben Franklin helps get that signed by the French king. The French agree to send money, supplies, weapons, soldiers, and provide a navy, which is probably the most important thing. They also agree to recognize America as an independent country, and America in return will allow the French to help negotiate the treaty at the end of the war. So we have our first treaty with another country being America. So the French are now our buddies. Lastly, now that we're done, did you get learned today? The first CCFA questions right there, what happened to Boston and New York during the early parts of the war? Number 2, why is the Battle of Trenton so important for America? Why could it be considered a mini turning point? Number 3, explain how Saratoga is a turning point in the war. Number 4, explain the significance of Valley Forge to America. And the last question is to analyze why the French signed the Treaty of Alliance. Make sure to go back. If you don't know those answers off the top of your head, make sure to go back, take some notes on those, click on this one more time, and get learned.